You're listening to the Be Better Off Show by Kelly+Partners.
Well, good morning and welcome to the Be Better Off Show, where we get leading Australians, interesting people and people that can inspire us to share their stories about being better off generally through their businesses. And today we've got Danielle Statham, who's built a company called Good Earth Cotton and FibreTrace. And I'm really very, very excited to hear the story of how this very, very interesting lady has been able to build this very, very interesting business. So good morning, Danielle.
Good morning, Brett. Great to be with you. Thank you for having me.
No problem at all. We always start at the beginning, which we find is a good place to start. Where did you grow up? Are you a Sydney sider? Bunch of brothers and sisters, and what did you do straight after school?
Yeah, so I'm Newcastle born and bred. I'm a middle child. I have two brothers. I guess you could say humble beginnings. I was born into a loving family and neighbourhood where I had friends who played on the street together, walked to school together, rode our bikes on the beach, typical Australian upbringing. I was born into the racing industry, actually. My father was a thoroughbred horse trainer. So I was surrounded by people who were not afraid of hard work. And throughout the thoroughbred industry, which is very unique in its own right, I learned some very key life learnings of hard work, keep trying, have fun along the way. And typically it's okay to have a gamble and to take a gamble. I was always a very confident child and adolescent. I also learned how to communicate very effectively through that childhood with all types of people from a young age. Adult conversation was quite normal in my world. Very normal, and adult conversation from all walks of life. A racecourse, as many of your viewers would probably know, is a colourful mix of storytellers and scallywags, high-profile business people, entrepreneurs, to just the everyday punter. So it really was a juxtaposition of humble surroundings mixed with the 80s where cash was king, and with beliefs if you dare to dream, you may well win the cup. So I tell my boys one of the best life traits is to have humility and the ability to honestly engage with people. And I can proudly say that my upbringing really shaped that and what I practice daily.
So it's very, very interesting. So your dad's a horse trainer, and I share your comments about, I do think the racetrack and that industry draws all sorts of people, and learning to mix with different people, I think is very, very helpful. So you finished school, and then what did you do straight out of school?
Yeah, so I was one of those lucky girls in one respect, that I always knew from a very young age that I wanted to be a part of fashion, textiles, or something in artistic creation. So I left school when I was 16. I found school extremely vanilla. I was happy to move on and study fashion. I was not allowed to leave school unless I actually knew what I wanted to do, of course. But I left school and studied at Fashion College in Newcastle. Back then, agriculture was not on my agenda. I'm sure I didn't even know at the age of 16 that cotton was grown from soil on a bush. Of course, early on, at the age of 16, I was going to be a couturier in Paris or have my own runway show with multiple workrooms, dream. I was very tactile and very visual, and I love the way that certain fabrics feel and the way that they drape and they can create a piece of art. And my love of the racing world also influenced my pursuit of being a couture milliner. That's hats and headpieces. And I, like 3D pieces of art, essentially. And millinery is one of those artisan industries which sadly has lost many of the lovely traditional techniques. And I was fortunate enough to be one of the last generations who were taught real millinery, where it was like slow fashion. Every bead was hand sewn, flowers were tooled with metal balls. I had the opportunity to train for a small while under one of the royal milliners. He was actually Diana's milliner, and that was just an incredible privilege. I think creativity is something that you can't be taught. It's one of those instincts that you're born with, and if cherished, it grows. If you fight it, it's a missing link in your life. I think creativity allows you to open challenges and to see all angles of situation. It creates a mind that looks beyond the status quo. So I went on to import labels on the wholesale distribution side. I dabbled in my own denim label for a while. And through this, I learned a lot about the angles of the fashion supply chain. And at that stage, also being involved in agriculture after I met my husband, and specifically the cotton industry. It was then that I identified a huge disparity between the raw fiber industry and the fashion industry.
There's a lot in that. That's so interesting. I think the opportunity to find something that you really love, and then to be able to study with people that have the craft, if you like, the actual ability to make something using the sort of fundamental foundational techniques is really, really, really interesting. And then you get into wholesale distribution, which is a whole different game, and find out that, okay, there's an agricultural world and there's this thing called cotton. Is that over a decade, or what period of time did that encompass?
So the wholesale distribution was, I think it was 2011. So that was a very interesting time of my life where you're importing labels from, you're purchasing labels and you're doing budgets, 6 months in advance, and you're dealing with currency trading, and it's very difficult. And it was a very big lesson in life. And I think that, talking about education, there's nothing better than being educated on the job and running with and rolling with the punches, and really seeing how hard it is just to make $1 out of selling one pair of jeans, so to speak.
Great. So to start your business, what was the inspiration? How old were you? Had you already had kids? Where were you up to in life when this idea came to you?
I mean, there was 20 years ago. There's a lot of companies that we're dealing with here. So there's the Sundown Pastoral Company business that we have, Good Earth Cotton and FibreTrace. But for 20 years, I really wanted to trace and understand that I could bring the cotton that we were growing back into my own product. And that was typically a very difficult thing to do when the commodity of cotton, once it leaves the shore, it gets blended and it goes into the big black hole of a spinning mill and mixed with a global commodity. So for 20 years, I wanted to do that, but we started the Good Earth Cotton business about 18 months ago, and the FibreTrace business approximately 3 to 4 years ago.
Right. Now, the concept with FibreTrace, can you share that with our listeners?
FibreTrace is exactly as it sounds. It's a solution that traces fiber, not just cotton. It traces all natural and man-made fibers. So wool, responsible cellulose, recycled PET, linen, recycled cotton, of course. As I mentioned, this has been 3 to 4 years in the making, and it's a solution which connects a physical commodity of the raw fiber and a digital software platform as a lock and key solution. And essentially, this creates a unique passport to travel the fashion supply chain with full transparency from raw fiber production to reuse and recycle.
And how practically do you do that? Like when you get a bale of wool or a chunk of cotton, how does the product itself work? Is it something you put into the product, or is it how does it actually work?
Yeah. So going back to traceability, FibreTrace is a traceability product, but when 3 or 4 years ago, traceability was a buzzword. So traceability was that buzzword that was being touted to assist the climate impact issue. And when I looked deeper into fashion and raw fiber traceability, I began to question what was being traced and what the story that traceability was allowing the brand to tell the customer. So I knew the nuances of the commodity of the trade of cotton. So I knew that cotton was this global crop that once offshore, as I mentioned before, it was blended with perhaps not so friendly cotton fibers. So it was par of the course for the ultimate yarn price that cotton had to be blended. So number one for traceability for me was raw fiber had to be physically traced. So how do we do this with FibreTrace? So FibreTrace is developed by having small dust-like particles. They're luminescent pigments which are embedded at ginning. Ginning for cotton is the cleaning process of the cotton. So once the bale is produced, we use high-security pigment scanners. So once the luminescent pigment is embedded into the fibre at the gin, the high-security pigment scanner reads the pigment through spectrometry. And what happens next is actually just amazing. The team have developed a scanner via Bluetooth, which is actually, we call it a dumb reader, and it has Bluetooth capability with GPS locators. And the scanner actually drops a code to the blockchain, and it performs a secure reading of the GPS location, the time, the date, who scanned the fibre, and so on, including the fibre impact score. So essentially it creates a passport with lock and key that has now connected the physical fibre to the information on the digital platform, ready to travel the supply chain for further recording, creating a mark for life. And that stays with the fibre for life, right through to reuse and recycle.
And who pays for it, Danielle? Is it the producer of the cotton that pays to have it marked, essentially, or is it the buyer, like the mill? How does the financial model work?
Yeah, so that's been like every startup, it's come up with the idea and then work out how to make the financial model work. But essentially, the brand or the consumer should be paying for the information. So how we would like eventually this process to work is that it becomes cost of goods. When we're talking cost of goods, it's cents, it's nickels and dimes to trace a fibre. It's with the Good Earth Cotton program, obviously it's going to work with all different fibres, but with Good Earth Cotton, it becomes cost of goods. It's embedded into the cotton, and the cotton is traded with a premium. We call it a Good Earth Cotton FibreTrace premium.
So you can make a margin, pay, like the producer pays to have their cotton marked, and then that increases the value of the cotton.
Well, it does, because yes, it does, because it's an identity cotton. And what's important here is to understand that everything comes at a cost, and sustainability comes at a cost, best practice comes at a cost. And with brands wanting to use an identity cotton or wanting to unlock a sustainability program, someone has had to pay for that in the beginning of the supply chain. And where that cost needs to go is back to the farmer. And what we need to remember here is that not all cotton is grown on large plantations. Cotton is grown in by some of the poorest people in the world. And by having an identity cotton and supporting those farmers, we need to have the money going back to the farmer where they have that cash crop, and they can, some of these people, it's such a small amount of money. It just educates their children. It puts a roof over their head or a small meal on the table. So to get that money back to the farmer is key.
So will those farmers be able to apply the technology in very developing world style situations?
We've created the technology in a developed country, obviously, because we've started this in Australia. We are looking at the moment at Brazil. We're into the US, into Turkey. The feeder machine, which is our proprietary technology, which is our patented technology, it's the size of a small crate, and it can actually be transported to any part of the world. So, and there's gins all over the world. So essentially the answer is yes.
So the future of that business, and how does that relate to Good Earth Cotton?
Yeah. So Good Earth Cotton. So what is Good Earth Cotton? So Good Earth Cotton started as an identity cotton, as I mentioned earlier. It was born over 18 months ago. And when I fell in love with my husband, I also fell in love with the industry that he was in, and that was cotton production. It's an amazing plant, cotton, and the way that it grows and it transforms. There's never an ugly moment, so to speak. You know, I'm a very visual person, so it transforms from gorgeous alien-like tentacles from the day that the seed germinates from the soil to lush, thick green leaves, and eventually, you know, it flowers into a hibiscus, and the pods of nut-like fruit open into tufts of white cotton. And I know you're at the snow at the moment, but when we're on the cotton field at the farm at this time of the year, once the leaves drop off, it really does resemble a cotton field for as far as you can see. So it's quite a spectacular sight. And so it's from this love and passion for fashion and the love and passion for the raw fiber that I felt cotton needed an identity, and the extensions that I've brought about to include the reduction of emissions in the fashion supply chain through that Good Earth Cotton brand. And what Good Earth Cotton can do is, through the way the cotton is grown, we sequester carbon. We sequester carbon into the soil. And when we sequester that carbon into the soil, and how we sequester the carbon into that soil is by having a thick, lush green plant, which through photosynthesis draws the CO2 from the atmosphere down into the soil and essentially trapping that into the soil. And through minimal to zero till and, you know, less disturbance of the soil as you can possibly have, and our farming techniques, and including innovation into the farm, we can actually keep that CO2 trapped in onto the soil. And when people ask me how much CO2 can you sequester, it's the number will always change, and that's what we have with quantitative data. And when I say quantitative data, for most of your viewers will probably understand that that's information that can be statistically observed and measured, right? So we need to be starting to think in this conversation of the decarbonisation of the supply chain that we need to think numbers and not words. We're finalising our numbers for this cropping season as we speak, but our last cotton crop sequestered 420 kilos of carbon per bale of cotton into the soil. Now, year on year, we supply an average of 55 to 70,000 bales to the globe. So based on that, and when you say this to anyone in the supply chain, they're kind of pie-eyed. And to put it in perspective, we sequester enough emissions to account for around 21 million tonnes of carbon. So to most people, the carbon world is a totally new place, and to us, it's also a new place. We're learning as we go as well. But that's enough to absorb the emission output for Apple worldwide, or to remove, over 4,500 cars from the road each year. So it's nothing to be sneezed at. And what we're hoping to do is, through our techniques and through this education, we can actually educate the consumer that by cropping cotton and in agriculture, you actually can make a difference and put claim to the hysteria that is out there with climate change.
It's very, very interesting. How do you get, in terms of the number of cotton growers globally, how will you get those techniques and that insight around the world? Is it through universities, or is it through on the ground government agencies in third world countries, or how do you get that?
Well, a lot of brands have placed a stake in the ground, and they've made a pledge. They've made a pledge to the public saying that they will only source sustainable cotton by, some of the pledges were 2020, and they haven't been able to do this, which I could foresee many years ago. 2020, 2023, 2025, I've read in 2030, a lot of them have been pushed out too. So the brands are seeking this out, and we're pushing from brand down. and the consumer's driving the brand as well. So there's a multitude of education that needs to be formed here, and yes, through industry, but also yes, through universities and shows like this where you can educate the consumer and really give truth to the nuance or the greenwashing or whatever it is that they're reading in marketplaces. But to be carbon friendly, data collection is key. So not everyone keeps their data. You need a baseline, or you need to understand your natural state and work from there. And without that, it's very hard to make a claim or a statement. Australian farmers are generally great at managing their natural resources. We're very innovative and we have, very amazing research teams. But for us to be able to start this movement, you have to obviously understand how to do it yourself before you can push this on to anyone else. And Sundown Pastoral Company have always had quantitative data, as I mentioned before. We've had 20 years of data collection. Our collection was about best practice and benchmarking year on year and how to better utilise our natural resources. And the aim of the game was essentially to grow more crop with less inputs. So we could identify a baseline in our soil with our soil carbon scientists. And that education is something that I'm very passionate about, and about the soil carbon number and about site-specific conversation of where the actual fibre grew. Not so much about the amount of trees that surround the paddock to give an offset. I mean, ideally, that would be perfect. In a perfect world, that would be ideal. But it's the purpose of the Good Earth Cotton movement to educate the grower and supply chain on how to understand what true sustainable fibres are and how to attain carbon positive farming techniques. But the key is to truly understand how your soil performs and how to show improvement in biodiversity.
So it's a really great story for, I think, all businesses, and it shows, I think, for many of our listeners and viewers that they are running businesses less complex than a farm, where carbon impact is easier to track, trace, and do something about than it certainly is in a farming situation. I think the tracing of cottons, really leads on to some of today's problems around, the way that labour is managed and looked after in the supply chain. Obviously, in Xinjiang, they've had their cotton industry under all sorts of scrutiny, which being able to trace where fibres come from and give consumers a chance to decide whether they want to support that sort of behaviour is helpful. It's a really, I think, interesting movement, because I think these issues of helping your client understand the practices of a business are going to be much more prominent over the next 25 years, which is really very interesting. I'd love to finish by asking you, Danielle, with your family and all that you've got going on. I always ask people, how are they managing, I hate the term work-life balance, but how do they best prioritize the things that matter to them? And how are you guys coping with the impact of COVID?
Yeah, as I mentioned before, I am the mother of 4 boys, and I often say 5 boys, including my husband. But how do you cope? I think you cope if you love what you do. It's not perceived as a job. You get on with it, and it works within your life. Our team, we've always had that philosophy where, with COVID, and particularly a lot of people working from home now, our team have always worked from home. Out on the farms, we have offices, but or they're in the fields. So, I mean, typically you don't want people in offices. You want people in the field tending to your commodity. But our team have always worked from home. So during COVID, that was very, very easy. And as I said, if you love what you do, it's not perceived as a job. I love what I do every day. I work with my husband every day. We do have offices at opposite ends of the house, mind you, but and I think that's probably part of the key.
That works.
That works really well.
Having your own space. I hear that from so many people.
Absolutely. Yeah. And our children are older now. My eldest is 23, the next one's 20, the next one's 18, the next one's 16. So they're quite self-sufficient. So loving what I do, and yeah.
And a good time to do it. Hey, I really want to thank you for your time today, Danielle. I think it's been incredibly interesting. And I hope if if our audience of listeners and viewers have questions, that they can get in touch, and we'll put them in touch with you, Danielle. I think what you're doing is really very interesting. Frankly, I think the sort of social impact of business is going to be even more under scrutiny than the environmental impact in short order, because of the climate piece the carbon piece will get sorted out fairly quickly, but sorting out some of the behaviour in factories in Bangladesh and China and other places is going to take more work, I suspect, and be much more controversial. But really great to spend time today. I know you've got a book by Valentino, the great couturier, behind you. So I hope he's still inspiring you every day to build a great business like he did. So I want to really thank you for your time today. And thanks everyone for listening.
Thank you, Brett.
Thanks for listening to the Be Better Off Show. If you enjoyed this episode, don't forget to rate and review on Apple Podcasts.
Have a great day.